Um, but there's a lot of stuff you can grow from. I want to hit some listener questions because you guys were nice enough to get them in. Before we go, start down here. It's difficult to see what went wrong on offense. Our players not developed as they should. The team was undisciplined and unprepared. Is this on the coaches? If the players are playing poorly in big moments, what do we need to do to get better? I mean, that's such a big question. Like ultimately, this comes down. We talked about it last week on this show and a couple others. I think schematically, you're kind of on the right path. I think you've got two play callers that are really really good. Hafley's only going to get better the more experience he has, and you see how Matt LaFleur is a masterful play caller in the National Football League. And so this really, to me, came down to as we thought it might, the ability of our players to execute, and then that is a broader question. If you want to talk about, do they play in big moments and this and that and the other thing, that's I don't ascribe. Well, confidence is the thing that matters most. If you're confident that you're going to beat your guy, you're going to play well in big moments, as opposed to being scared. So there's a lot of things that go into that. So preparation is the only form of confidence that nobody can take away from you. So I think that's important. But the thought process behind development. I mean, look at this is maybe a cruel thing to say, but look at the Georgia guys on Philly and look at the Georgia guys on our team. Now they're different humans completely, but their Georgia guys are different than our Georgia guys. Then Quay, Devontae versus Nolan, Jonathan Davis, and then their best player, who's for whatever reason I'm such a knucklehead. I can't ever seem to remember his name. Jalen Carter. Those guys are the offensive line development. Now they're drafting those guys high. They're putting priorities on that, but Jeff Stoughton's probably the best offensive line coach in the game. So they're drafting and developing these guys at such a high level, and you see the difference. Now, I've said this. I think that's the biggest difference right now between the Packers and the elite teams. When you talk about in the NFC North, even the Lions, the Vikings, and you look at the NFC broadly, the Eagles, the development of these guys, as opposed to maybe you look at the Chiefs and you go, well, Joe Thuney was good when he got there from New England. I think they've done Creed Humphrey was going to be a good player, but they've done a great job developing him. But they've had poor tackle play for 3 years and won 6 years and won 3 Super Bowls. So, Chris Jones developed into a hell of a player. But if you look at Chris Jones, you kind of close your eyes and go, maybe he would have been. Those guys are winning a lot more if you just look at the pass rush of the Chiefs. I'm digressing a little bit, but they're not. They're winning because they have an extremely talented quarterback, a Hall of Fame tight end as his dance partner, and some really good scheme, and then some good guys at key positions. So interior offensive line and defensive tackle are like top notch. And they've got good players all over the board. Don't get me wrong, but it's different than maybe some of these other teams where you're like, these guys are actually, the Lions draft and develop. Holy hell. The Vikings, for the most part, are bringing guys in and making them remarkably better. And then you look at obviously the Eagles here. So I think part of that is just trying to maybe focus it on a little bit more, but also that's always the responsibility of if he's not getting it done at practice, you got to find another way to do it. When you plan on start to watch film for the 2025 draft, I'll be honest with you, I don't watch that much film for I'm not really interested in players until they go to a team that I'm interested in watching. I'll look at a couple guys that go on the Packers radar, but I probably won't do that until somebody comes out with some idea of, I'm not even a mock draft necessarily, but just some guys. Like I always like watching offensive linemen, tight ends, like watching the defensive line, defensive tackles, linebackers, like box. I just like watching box players. I guess the easiest way for me to put it. I just think the confrontation part of the sport is just what I'm really into. So I'll probably start watching those in a couple months. Do you think, in hindsight, that we should have rested players last week like most other teams? No, I think this is. I think the way that they did it. Listen, Mr. Miyagi. You go karate down the left side of the street, fine. Right side of the street, fine. Down the middle, squish like great, right? You can't do what we did last week, and I think this and the week before are uh, reasons why. You can't go into a game and say, "Hey, we're going to play you guys, but we're going to try to run the score up, and then we're going to go ahead and sit on the bench. We're going to take you out because this isn't preseason football. You're trying to sharpen your sword, and you have, except for last year, you have the second. The last 2 years, the two youngest playoff teams in the history of the NFL. So you don't have the maturity on your team, or maybe the leadership, or just the experience to say we can rest these guys. These guys don't need reps. We can't get better at some. There's the the need for the necessity for improvement outmatches maybe some of the banging that's going to go on during that week. But the mentality of like we're attacking this season until the season's over is something that I think this team could have used that they didn't get. And we talked about that a little last week. You can only rest 6 or 7 guys. And so then you start going, well, who are the 6 or 7 guys? Like you can't rest the offensive lineman if you have your quarterback in. If you don't have your quarterback in, then you start going, well, what's that going to do to disrupt the rest of the players? It's a real hard math deal. I mean, and then you start going, should I just rest the defense? Yeah, it's really difficult. You could say right off the top of your head, you go, okay, I'm probably going to rest Kenny Clark. I'm probably going to rest Josh Jacobs, but then you start going, okay, what is our offense going to look like? It's really hard for Elgton. Okay, if you rest Jenkins, for example, after you put in either one of the guards, and you go, okay, does that hurt Jordan Love? I'll rest Jordan. Okay, yeah, you just keep going. It just goes down and down and down. I think it's really, I just think it's a really slippery slope, and I prefer the Dan Campbell approach, man. Let's play the games we're supposed to play. Was the lack of perimeter runs, Matt LaFleur acknowledging weren't going to hold up front, or just to break down play calling? Do you think perimeter runs would have helped their downhill approach appropriate? So what we saw was, we can't win a one-on-one because they're better up front consistently. And so the double team stuff started working as it has historically with this team. You get in a little bit of trouble, you start running the gap stuff. The gap stuff works a little bit better, right? Because you're trying to cut the defense, you can get a double team on somebody. So I think that makes sense. I would have said, yeah, you like the perimeter runs. I think the problem is the way that they play on the outside at the stand-up linebacker or the defensive end position. You don't really know where that guy is going to be if you're trying to crack on him, right? He's not really consistent in where he lines up. And then the way they were IDing and shooting their gun at the linebacker position, quite frankly, that was the most shocking thing for me going into the game, watching their last film and then watching this film, how they diagnosed and moved so fast. They were really good on the second level. I was surprised. Now, would they have done that if it weren't consistently going downhill? Probably not. So maybe that's an opportunity lost. But you get into these games and you're like, I can't move the ball. We're down. Our guard got hurt. You start going, all right, what? Like, again, there are scenarios built in. Everybody has a plan to get punched in the mouth. There's scenarios built in. One of the scenarios that is not built in is like it's the fourth quarter, you're down to a touchdown, 10 points, and your left guard and your starting left guard and center are hurt. That's not built into and your top 2 receivers got hurt. Like that's not built into the model. It's like, what do you do with that? So a lot of this stuff you start having to call plays. For example, if Jenkins was going to be single blocking most of the night because you wanted to give the help over to the right guard, all of a sudden Jenkins gets hurt. It's like, what do you do? That was part of your game plan. Describe the emotions inside an NFL locker room after a playoff loss, especially when you knew you had a team. Well, we lost to Philly with the 4th and 26 play, and I think that was the best Packers team I had ever been on. I was on, excuse me. And you just felt completely depleted. And you start, it's hard not to think about all the opportunities that you had in the game. This game wasn't as close. I think, we had over 200 yards rushing in that game. We missed the 4th and 1 on down on the goal line. We didn't take the 4th and 1 to finish to ice the game. We punted it away. They get the 4th and 26. We throw the pick that I think we ran past 66T in overtime. Brett throws the pick. They come back. Brian with Westbrook's getting the ball every damn play. I think they end up kicking a field goal to win. And so there's so many like very, very specific isolated plays in that game where everyone says, "Oh, it's not this play or that play," but it's like, dude, if you had 4th and 1 on the goal line, you had 4th and 1 to finish the game, and you didn't take it. Those plays they count a little bit more. It feels like than other times. So you fixate and focus on those more for sure. Can you talk about the helmet to helmet to Jenkins shoulder chest area? Is that play common? Yeah, it's super common. Yeah, I talked about it earlier. Like the stinger is something. It's not as popular as it used to be. I don't know, but I feel like guys used to get stingers all the time. Like it's a big high school thing too. And it's like a glancing blow to your head can just kind of shock you into one. And it's the good thing for Jenkins is the season's over. Because the bad thing about stingers, honestly, is like you get one and then they just keep coming over and over and over again. And once you get one, like that heal process, if you got to keep on taking hits, takes a long ass time, and it is not fun, man. You just like the anticipation of it happening again is not a great feeling. Just like not knowing if when you're going to see the version of this team again, or knowing that you're not going to, and leaving the season, I think was a lot of positive takeaways, but what are the big questions? How are we going to help Jordan Love take that next step as a quarterback? Who on the offense? Like, when are we going to get that? Are we ever going to get that mentality? Like, here's the other thing. Like, is kind of an interesting. I don't know if this matters or not, but Matt LaFleur is really well manicured, and you look across you look across the field, and Nick Sirianni's got the 40-year-old beard, and looks. I mean, when are we gonna? Who's giving this team that like just pound it out? I'm fighting mentality. Like I can duke some of these out. Where does that come? It just doesn't feel like that's the mentality of the head coach. I think the head coach is a phenomenal play caller. I think he's more than shown his chops as a head football coach, and I'm not questioning it. Everybody's got a different style, but he's also he doesn't come off as that kind of guy. And Mike Vrabel just got hired by the Patriots. He comes off as that kind of guy. DC up in Detroit comes off as that kind of those. So there's different types, and that's okay. But who on this team staff, like who is that person or that group that pushes that mentality? Because that's what you're going to need. You look at like how are teams winning these games? They're winning. I mean, shit, the Rams had 9 sacks last night. They're winning the line of scrimmage. So no pass rush, got to fix that. Improvement on the offensive line, I think maybe more so than anything is a mental game. How do we improve that? And those are the big questions that I look at in this team. Obviously, you got some Jay Alexander questions. You got some, and then maybe secondary questions because of that. I think you have some linebacker questions as far as how you're going to make that work, knowing that who's been drafted in certain positions and rounds, and then who's going to is somebody ever going to emerge as the number 1 wide receiver, and what does that look like? Or is it just Tucker Kraft because he's pretty damn good too? Yeah, but there's not a ton of questions here, but I think the most pressing one is like, are we ever going to have a group that is dominating the line of scrimmage? And if that's what we want, do we have the right people? Do we have the right leadership? Do we have the right coaching? I mean, like, what can we tweak there to make that a realistic thing? Or maybe that's not as important. Certainly, these guys know more than I do. But anyways, I hope you've enjoyed. We'll get back to this at some point, but probably not next week. Maybe I'll do some playoff stuff. There's some interesting teams in there, and there's certainly gonna be some good matchups coming up. But it's been a lot of fun. I hope you guys have enjoyed. And hit me up, Michael60. Thanks to our sponsor for Bet Online. Fantasy Underdogs joining us as well, so I'm going to give a shout out to them. And thanks, guys. See you.